Hi everybody, and welcome again to my channel. I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. I saw a video recently covering one of the morning worships at Bethel, in which Anthony Morris tried to describe, or explain rather, why the governing body is not dogmatic. So he defined dogmatic, and then the basic thrust of his argument as to why the governing body was not dogmatic was that people are blessed for following them, and he used as his reference the account in Acts chapter 15, during which a dispute was resolved. A letter was sent out to the congregations letting them know a dispute was resolved, and people were then blessed for working along with that letter. But this instance in Acts falls short of representing what Anthony Morris wants it to in a number of different ways. First of all, that chapter of Acts can in no way be used to infer directly or indirectly the existence of a governing body, especially when taken in the context of the New Testament. So, for example, the Apostle Paul was appointed directly by Jesus Christ himself. Therefore, if there was a governing body in the first century, the Apostle Paul would have had to have been on it. Was he? Well, if you read Acts, you will discover that most of his work was directed out of Antioch, not out of Jerusalem, and it wasn't even necessarily directed by the apostles as a body. In fact, a lot of his work was directed by Jesus Christ himself. And if you read the first two chapters of Galatians, you will discover that Paul goes out of his way to say that he barely ever went to Jerusalem. He went twice in 17 years. The first time, he only saw a couple of people, not an entire body of apostles. He was there briefly and left. And the second time was most likely to resolve the dispute that was mentioned in Acts chapter 15. And if you read Acts chapter 15, the final decision was agreed to by the older men, but the whole entire congregation, indicating those that were not just elders, but literally the entire congregation, favored sending out a letter. And basically what the letter said is that the people from Jerusalem were the ones causing the problem. They were teaching something that was no longer true. So there was no necessity to adhere to those teachings that were no longer true, and just keep working together basically. So when congregations adhered to that, they prospered. But that cannot be construed as direction from any type of governing body, because that was a one-time event that involved more than just the older men. And Paul, who would have had to have been on the governing body, didn't work out of Jerusalem and didn't even spend a lot of time in Jerusalem, and obviously got no instruction or direction from Jerusalem. And he goes out of his way to say that in Galatians. So, Anthony Morris attempting to use the parallel of saying that since people were blessed for following the instruction that came out of that meeting, and henceforth they will be blessed if they follow instruction from the governing body, is not even close to comparing. Those two things are not similar. So basically, when Anthony Morris tries to explain why the governing body is not dogmatic, what he resorts to is giving a dogmatic answer about how they are not dogmatic. He thus proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that the governing body is in fact dogmatic. They cannot supply any legitimate reason for most of their decisions. They just say, oh, well, you're going to be blessed if you obey us. That is the very definition of being dogmatic. And there's another thing I just wanted to discuss. I looked back over the video where, David Splain discussed the definition of a generation. And there's even more absurdity to be found in his definition. So, for example, he puts Nathan Noor in the second generation, the overlapping generation. But there's a problem with that. Nathan Noor was born in 1905. Henceforth, he actually was in the generation of people who saw the events of 1914. So now here's where you see where the governing body is really distorting and twisting the definition of a generation. They're trying to say that the generation only applies to people who were anointed at the time of 1914. But the problem is, this goes completely against every definition of the word generation. For example, in the United States in 1969, there was a generation of people that was alive and that were young when an event called Woodstock happened. Now, you didn't actually have to be present at Woodstock to be part of that generation, but that happened during your generation, and you are part of that generation, whether you were at Woodstock or not. And the same thing with 1914. If you were in a certain age group at that time, if you were alive, you are in the generation of people who saw 1914. There are no two ways about it. So, now with the governing body trying to define Nathan Noor as being in that second generation, you now have one individual who is in two generations at the same time. So therefore, you could literally say that Nathan Noor is the definition of an overlapping generation. And he lived to be somewhere in his 70s. I believe 72. He died in 1977. So by that definition, a overlapping generation would be 72 years. So if you add that to 1914, you still fall short of getting anywhere near the time of where we are. So you see, when you logically analyze the doctrines that they put out there about anything, they're foolish beyond any ability to describe. It's ridiculous, is the only way to put it. And these are the people who insist that they are the only ones that have the truth on the planet. Yet they cannot understand the definition of a word that most people understand by the time they're in elementary school. So when you talk about twisting the scriptures, you can literally watch as these individuals try to twist the scriptures, and they try to twist definitions of words to make it look as if their beliefs are in any way, shape, or form valid. Well, they're not. And they're very dogmatic about saying so. They pretend to know what dogmatic means, and they excuse the reason as to why they're not dogmatic. These individuals are not even dealing with reality at this point. So anyways, that's just another interesting point I thought I would make. Thanks for watching.